Sweat and medical-grade bleach stung his nostrils as he clutched the leaking takeout bag. They thought he was just a tired guy in a cheap windbreaker. They wanted to see the delivery driver bleed on their pristine mats. They didn't realize the nylon was hiding a ghost. Seth shifted his weight off his left knee. The joint had been grinding like a pepper mill since a hard landing in the Arghandab Valley 6 years ago. But today, it was the damp cold of the city that made it throb. Rainwater dripped from the frayed brim of his baseball cap, cutting a cold path down the back of his neck. In his hands, a soggy paper bag radiated the greasy warmth of 3 orders of chicken teriyaki. The smell of scorched soy sauce mixed with the metallic tang of wet asphalt. He pushed through the heavy glass doors of Apex Grappling. The transition from the chaotic, freezing street to the interior of the gym was jarring. The air inside was thick, hyperclimate controlled, smelling of ozone, expensive mat cleaner, and the faint, musky undertone of collective exertion. It was a cathedral of modern combat sports, all exposed brick, black steel girders, and acres of pristine royal blue tatami mats. Seth dragged his boots across the entryway rug. They were cheap work boots, the faux leather peeling at the toes, currently caked in a gritty paste of sidewalk mud and flattened wet leaves. He checked his phone. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbed across the delivery app's interface. Leave at front desk. There was no one at the front desk. A sleek, minimalist reception counter sat empty. Beyond it, the mats were alive with rolling bodies. It was an advanced GI class. Seth stood there for a minute, the thermal bag burning his wrist, a cold puddle expanding around his boots. He watched them grapple. They were good, fluid, technical. He saw a triangle choke sink in, watched a guy shrimp out of half guard. It was beautiful, really, like a violent ballet, but it was sterile. To Seth, conditioned in the mud and blood of close-quarters combat, where a fight meant tearing at a man's throat with a shattered piece of ceramic plating, this looked like a game of physical chess. Nobody here was fighting for their next breath in a ditch. They were fighting for a tap. "Hey, you lost, man!" Seth blinked, snapping his attention away from a pair of blue belts. A guy was walking toward the edge of the mats. He was tall, maybe 22, with the lean, heavily muscled build of an athlete who counted his macros religiously. He wore a crisp white G patched with sponsor logos. His belt was purple, heavily frayed at the ends, a stylistic choice Seth recognized as a way of showing how much time he'd spent on the mats. This was Cameron. He was sweating, but it was a clean sweat. He smelled faintly of sandalwood soap. "Delivery," Seth said. His voice was gravelly, quiet. He hoisted the greasy paper bag slightly. "Name's on the receipt. Just need to drop it." Cameron wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his GI. He looked Seth up and down, his eyes snagging on the cheap, soaked windbreaker, the mud-caked boots, the slumped posture. Seth knew what he looked like. He looked defeated. He looked like the invisible underclass that brought these people their calories. "Desk girls in the back," Cameron said, his tone clipped. "Don't drip that grease on the floor. I just had the epoxy redone." Seth didn't care about the attitude. He just wanted his delivery fee. He took a step toward the desk, but the floor was slick from a spilled water bottle. His boot caught the edge of the puddle, and he slipped. It wasn't a hard fall. Seth's balance was instinctual. He caught himself, his weight dropping low, his right foot stepping out to stabilize, but his right foot landed on the sacred blue mat. A muddy, wet boot print stamped perfectly onto the pristine tatami. The gym went quiet. It wasn't a sudden, cinematic silence, but a gradual cessation of squeaking mats and heavy breathing. A few pairs of grapplers stopped rolling, sitting up on their knees to look. Cameron stopped wiping his face. His jaw tightened. He looked at the mud on the mat, then up at Seth. The annoyance in the kid's eyes mutated into a sharp, predatory irritation. "Are you kidding me?" Cameron's voice echoed off the high ceilings. "Step off the mat. Now." Seth pulled his foot back immediately. "My bad," he muttered. He wasn't scared. He was just exhausted. He didn't want the hassle. Floor was slick. I'm off. You dragged street garbage onto the training area, Cameron said, stepping closer to the edge, his bare toes curling against the edge of the blue foam. Do you have any idea how unhygienic that is? We get staph infections from less. I said I was sorry. Where's the trash can? I'll grab some paper towels. Don't try to brush past it, Cameron snapped. He stepped off the mat, crossing the invisible boundary between his sanctuary and the dirty real world. He stood inches from Seth. The height difference was negligible, but Cameron puffed his chest out, flaring his lats. It was classic mammalian posturing. Seth felt a dull ache in his jaw. He was clenching his teeth. He forced his mandible to relax. He looked at Cameron's chest, not his eyes. Eye contact was a challenge. Chest watching allowed him to track shoulder movement. Look, Seth said, his tone flat, devoid of the subservience Cameron clearly expected. The food is here. The mat is dirty. I'll wipe it up. Then I'm going back out into the rain. We don't need to do a whole thing here. Cameron laughed, a short, ugly sound. He glanced back at his training partners. A few of them chuckled along. It was an audience. That was dangerous. Men with an audience had egos to feed. You don't get to tell me what we need to do, Cameron said, turning his attention back to Seth. You walk in here looking like a vagrant, disrespect my gym, and then catch an attitude. Seth felt the damp cold of his socks. He felt the phantom pain in his knee. He felt tired, so deeply, fundamentally tired. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled napkin from a previous delivery, and knelt down. He scrubbed at the muddy boot print. The mud smeared a little before coming off. There, Seth said, standing back up, tossing the soiled napkin into a nearby bin. Clean. Take your chicken. He set the bag on the reception desk. He turned to leave. Cameron grabbed his shoulder. It was a strong grip. Cameron's fingers dug into the cheap nylon of the windbreaker, anchoring against the muscle underneath. Seth stopped. He didn't flinch. He didn't jerk away. He just went entirely unnervingly still. The background noise of the gym, the hum of the industrial HVAC, the distant wail of a police siren outside, seemed to mute. Seth's peripheral vision widened. The heart rate monitor in his brain, usually sluggish and worn out, gave a single, solid thump. Threat detected. Assessing parameters. Cameron's weight was shifted 90% onto his lead leg. His chin was up, exposed. His right hand was on Seth's shoulder. His left hand was dropping slightly toward his waist. He was in range. He was wide open. But Seth fought the conditioning. He took a slow breath, inhaling the scent of sandalwood and sweat. He forced himself to be the delivery guy. Let go of the jacket, Seth said. His voice dropped an octave. It lost the gravelly exhaustion and became terrifyingly smooth. Cameron felt the shift even if he couldn't intellectually identify it. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the younger man's face. He was used to people cowering. He was a local champion, a prodigy who had been choking out grown men since he was 16. He knew how bodies reacted to intimidation. They tightened up. They leaned back. This guy didn't lean back. He had just gone dead, like a heavy stone sitting at the bottom of a cold river. But the audience was watching. A guy with a cauliflower ear and a brown belt leaned against the wall holding up his phone. The little red light was on. Recording. Cameron tightened his grip. Or what? You're going to fight me? You look like you'd shatter if I took you down. You can't fight. You're a delivery boy. Seth looked at the hand on his shoulder. He noted the thick knuckles, the calluses from gripping thick cotton lapels. Strong fingers. But fingers break easily if you know how to torque the middle joint. 7 pounds of pressure, a voice whispered in the back of Seth's mind. That's all it takes to snap the index finger. Grab the wrist, pivot the hips, break the grip, drive the palm into the nasal bone. Swallowed the voice. I'm working. I don't want any trouble, just let go. It sounded like a plea, but it wasn't. It was Seth giving himself a legal and moral alibi. He was establishing the boundaries of self-defense. It was an old habit. Cameron smiled. He mistook the restraint for cowardice. "Pick up the napkin," he said. Seth frowned. "I threw it in the trash." "I don't care. Dig it out. Apologize to my instructor over there. Then you can leave." The absurdity of it washed over Seth. It was petty. It was small. He had held a dying kid in his arms in a Humvee that smelled of copper, blood, and burning diesel, listening to the radio crackle with frantic medevac calls. He had spent months carrying a silence so heavy it threatened to crush his spine. And now he was standing in a brightly lit room that smelled of bleach, being told to dig a napkin out of the garbage by a boy whose biggest hardship was a weight cut for a grappling tournament. A cynical, dark humor bubbled up in Seth's chest. A low, dry sound escaped his throat. A chuckle. Cameron's face flushed red. The mockery was intolerable. "You think this is funny?" Cameron shoved him hard. It was a two-handed push to the center of Seth's chest. The physics of it were designed to knock Seth off balance, to send him stumbling backward onto the hard epoxy floor. Seth didn't stumble. Instead of fighting the kinetic force, Seth absorbed it. He let his upper body yield, rolling his shoulders back, while his feet executed a microscopic, precise drop step. His center of gravity plummeted. He absorbed the push like water absorbing a thrown stone. He barely moved 2 inches. Cameron stared, thrown off by the lack of physical resistance. When you push a man, he's supposed to fall, or push back. Seth did neither. "Don't put your hands on me again," Seth said. The polite delivery driver was gone. The voice was dead flat, carrying a chilling, absolute certainty. Cameron's ego took the wheel. He stepped in, reaching out with both hands to grab the lapels of Seth's windbreaker, a classic judo collar tie. He planned to sweep Seth's leg, dump him hard on the concrete, and embarrass him on camera. He grabbed the fabric. Seth moved. It wasn't a wild swing. It wasn't a haymaker born of anger. It was a mechanical, brutal response wired into his nervous system through thousands of hours of repetitive stress training in kill houses in foreign deserts. As Cameron's hands clamped onto the jacket, Seth brought his own left hand up in a tight, short arc. The blade of his forearm smashed into the inside of Cameron's left elbow. It was a precise strike to the radial nerve. A sharp, electric jolt shot up Cameron's arm. His fingers involuntarily sprang open, deadened and numb. His left grip failed instantly. Before Cameron's brain could even register the pain, Seth's right hand shot forward, not in a fist, but as an open palm. He didn't aim for the jaw. He aimed for the center of Cameron's chest, right at the sternum. Seth stepped into the strike, driving off his bad knee, channeling his entire body weight through his shoulder, down his arm, and into the heel of his hand. Thud. It sounded like a heavy sandbag hitting a brick wall. The air violently escaped Cameron's lungs in a wet, ragged gasp. The force of the blow lifted Cameron's lead foot off the ground. He flew backward. He didn't stumble. He was launched. He skidded across the slick epoxy floor, his bare feet squeaking wildly, before he crashed back first into the edge of the blue tatami mat. Silence descended on the gym. Real silence this time. The kind that sucks the oxygen out of the room. The guy filming lowered his phone. Cameron lay on the mat, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. As his diaphragm spasmed, desperately trying to pull air back into his paralyzed lungs, Seth stood in the entryway. He hadn't broken a sweat. His breathing was slow, deep, and rhythmic through his nose. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles slightly white, feeling a sudden, intense disgust with himself. He had let the cage open. He had reacted. He adjusted his cheap windbreaker, pulling the collar straight. The zipper rattled softly in the quiet room. "I said," Seth murmured, the words meant for no one but himself. "I didn't want any trouble." He turned away from the gasping boy and the frozen athlete, stepping back out into the freezing, relentless rain. The heavy glass door swung shut behind him, cutting off the bright, sterile world of the gym. The rain was freezing now, turning into a slushy mix that slapped against Seth's face the moment the gym doors sealed shut behind him. He walked to the curb, head down. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt sick. His beat-up 2008 Honda Civic sat parked in a yellow zone, the engine ticking as it cooled. He grabbed the door handle, slick with icy water, and pulled. The interior smelled of stale French fries, damp upholstery, and old pine air freshener. He collapsed into the driver's seat, slamming the door. The sound insulated him from the city traffic, replacing the roar of tires on wet asphalt with the frantic, unsteady sound of his own breathing. The adrenaline dump hit him like a physical blow. His hands, steady just 2 minutes ago, began to tremble violently. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white, but the plastic felt alien and distant under his fingertips. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, mingling with the rain. His stomach cramped. He leaned over the center console, opening the passenger door just in time to dry heave onto the wet concrete gutter. Nothing came up. He hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at 6 that morning. This was the biological reality of violence. The movies never showed the aftermath. The horrific cocktail of cortisol and epinephrine flooding the nervous system, turning muscles to jelly, and making the mind race with paranoid, gagged thoughts. He had lost control. That was the truth of it. He sat back up, wiping his mouth with the back of his shivering hand, tasting salt and bile. He had let a 20-something with an inflated ego drag him back into the dark room in his head. I am a civilian, he reminded himself, resting his forehead against the cold steering wheel. I deliver food. I pay rent. I keep my head down. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It vibrated against his thigh. An angry, persistent insect. He pulled it out, the cracked screen illuminating the dark cabin. New order available. $4.50, 3.2 miles. He stared at the number. $4.50. He had just potentially fractured a local sports star's sternum, risked assault charges, and blown his anonymity, all for a job that paid less than the cost of a gallon of gas. A hollow, self-deprecating laugh rattled in his chest. He tapped accept. He turned the key. The Honda's engine cranked, whining in protest before sputtering to life. The heater blew lukewarm, dusty air into his face. He pulled away from the curb, merging into the sluggish artery of city traffic. For the next 3 hours, Seth became a ghost again. He ferried lukewarm pizza, leaking containers of tom yum soup, and squashed chasti fast food burgers to apartment complexes and office buildings. He trudged up concrete stairwells that smelled of weed and bleach. He stood under flickering porch lights, handing over brown paper bags to people who never looked him in the eye. But the silence in his car wasn't empty anymore. It felt heavy, loaded. At a red light, he picked up his phone. He opened a social media app. He didn't search for his own name. He didn't have a digital footprint to speak of. He searched the name of the gym. It was the first result. A video, shot vertically, shaky at first, then steadying. The caption read, "Cameron gets folded by the DoorDash guy." Seth watched it with the sound off. He watched himself stand there, slumped, looking small. He watched the shove. He analyzed his own movement with clinical detachment. The drop step was sloppy. His bad knee had hesitated for a microsecond. The strike was technically sound, but he had telegraphed it slightly by shifting his shoulder. In a real firefight, that microsecond would have gotten him killed. The video had 200,000 views. It had been uploaded 50 minutes ago. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The light turned green. He pressed the accelerator, the Honda's worn tires spinning for a second on the wet paint of the crosswalk before catching grip. He wasn't worried about the cops. Cameron had thrown the first 2 physical aggressions. It was textbook self-defense, easily provable by the idiot's own gym buddy. What terrified Seth was the exposure. He had spent 6 years trying to fade into the drywall of society. He wanted to be the invisible man. Now, he was a viral spectacle. His knee began to throb in earnest, a deep, grinding ache that felt like ground glass in the joint. He needed ice. He needed sleep. He needed this night to end. It was 1:15 a.m. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city slick and reflective under the harsh glare of street lamps. Seth pulled into a brightly lit gas station. The fluorescent canopy buzzed overhead, a persistent, mosquito-like hum. He killed the engine and walked into the convenience store. The air inside was artificially dry, smelling of rotating hot dogs and floor wax. He walked to the back, grabbing a bag of frozen peas to use as an ice pack and a lukewarm black coffee from a dispenser that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Obama administration. He paid the bored cashier, walked back out into the damp chill, and leaned against the cold metal of his car door. He cracked the coffee lid. It tasted like burnt pennies. Tires hissed on the wet pavement. A black SUV pulled into the lot, idling near the pumps. It didn't need gas. Seth's peripheral vision locked onto it. He didn't tense, but his weight subtly shifted, distributing evenly between both feet. He took a sip of the terrible coffee. The driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. He was in his late 40s, wearing a heavy wool coat over a dark sweater. He had the thick, sloping shoulders of a lifelong grappler and the flattened cartilage of a cauliflower ear on his left side. It was the head coach from Apex Grappling. Seth had seen his picture on the gym's window decal. The man didn't swagger. He walked with a heavy, deliberate gait. He stopped about 6 feet from Seth, a respectful distance. "You're hard to track down," the man said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone. "Had a buddy run your license plate off the gym's exterior security cam." Seth didn't answer. He held the paper cup, feeling the heat bleed through the thin cardboard. "I'm Tom," the coach said. "I own Apex." "I delivered the food," Seth replied, his tone flat. "The transaction is complete." Tom let out a short, breathy sigh. He looked at the rusted fender of the Honda, then back at Seth's tired face. "Cameron's at the ER. X-rays are negative, but he's got a hairline fracture in his sternum and severe bruising on his radial nerve. Kid can't close his left hand." "He shoved me." "I know. I saw the video. The whole damn internet saw the video." Tom dug his hands into his coat pockets. "Cameron's an idiot. He's young, he's talented, and people have been telling him he's a killer since he was 16. He needed a reality check. I'm just sorry you had to be the one to give it to him." Seth took another sip of coffee. He didn't want an apology. He wanted to go home.